Dharma mechanic, how to get it done. So how do we begin practicing Dharma? Obviously, if we're interested in Buddhism, something that the Buddha taught or represents has resonated within us. With me, it was not anything new that the Dharma brought into my life, but rather when I came across what are called in Buddhism the four thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma. That's the name of them. And I saw these, when I read about these four thoughts, to my astonishment, they were my own thoughts for the most part. So I felt very much like I had found my tribe. And these four thoughts are called in the Dharma the common preliminaries. And yeah, I'm going to detail them here through a link for those who don't know them. Although Buddhism is often called a religion, I never saw it that way. I've never been much into organized religion, which to me is almost an oxymoron. Being invited to look at my own mind with greater awareness never offended me. That's something I wanted to do, and I never thought of it as invasive. What I found in Buddhism was what I already knew in my own heart, just more of it, more organized and in a much richer detail. So how could I deny that? It was everything that I already cared about. So that first step into studying the Dharma for me was the easy one. The next step, how do we practice Dharma, was more difficult. In fact, when I got into this, and it was in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the idea of Dharma practice never crossed my mind. Buddhism back then was basically, to the group of people, young people that I was in, basically a philosophy that, along with other philosophies like existentialism and so forth, we would stay up late at night drinking bad instant coffee. We didn't have coffee shops. We didn't have espresso or cafe this or cafe that. And we would probably smoke cigarettes and drink bad instant coffee. There were no Starbucks or even coffee shops that were open late back then. And about the only Dharma practice I knew of in those days was, standard sitting meditation. And it was Zen Buddhism, that was brought me my first extended encounter with sitting on a cushion. And when I sat in an all-day sesshin with Roshi Philip Kapleau from the Rochester Zen Center. This was, I believe, in the late 1960s. But it was not until the early 1970s and the advent of the great Siddha Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, when he came to America, a Tibetan Lama, that the Dharma as a path, not just a philosophy, was brought home to me. So it was no longer was Buddhism something for me to think about, but rather something to do. It's a life path one could follow. And it was then that the question of which Dharma practice arose in me. What should I do at all, and what should I do first? Now, since then, many years have passed, decades, and I have done many different Dharma practices. And by now I have a pretty fair idea of what's out there that we can do and how to do it. And, what are the results that we can expect? And this is where I might have some words of advice. The idea of endlessly practicing meditation to achieve a final result is real. That is clearly a traditional fact, and it's one that I experienced. Whether there is an alternate approach is what I question, and that's what I want to discuss. Certainly, what I'm trying to say is I knew what it was like to practiced meditation for many years without getting much of a result, at least that I could tell. The idea of pondering a Zen koan for many years is also a fact, and that tradition is a meaningful approach. But we do come up against spiritual thresholds, ones that can't be taken by storm or by just sheer effort or by money or anything else, influence, friends you know, but they depend upon actual realization on our part, which is something we can't just order up. Indeed, there are a lot of folks waiting around, the cosmic water cooler for a breakthrough when it comes to achieving realization. So in this article, I'm not referring to our eventual enlightenment or even our eventual realization, but I'm talking about the preliminaries that we all face that lead up to the impasse that realization or attaining realization can present to us, something we can't just push through. We have to actually realize. And how to start out toward that. For one, there's no avoiding preliminary practice. But there do seem to be alternative approaches, a priority sequencing of practices as to what we do first, and other things to consider as well. And that's what I'm talking about here. It's very similar to what we did as Boy Scouts, starting a campfire with flint and steel. We would strike the flint and the steel, and we would spark away until one tiny spark was caught by the kindling and nurtured and protected from the wind, etc., very, very carefully. Just banging away at meditation by rote never seemed to work for me. And that's the important thing I'm trying to share for just doing it by rote, because that's how you do it. Unless we can keep the spark in our practice fresh and alive, the fire of realization, well, first of all, will never appear, but even the beginnings of it, that spark, will easily go out or never even start. And then we are stuck with rote repetition and perhaps no result that we can see. Because of this consideration, as beginners, we want to pick a practice that maximizes our chances of sustaining interest, keeping awake, until realization of one kind or another comes along. Otherwise, as mentioned, we can just be out there, spinning our wheels. Now, as I've shared many times before, it's not easy to find a Dharma practice that we can do just straight away. In particular, one that by just doing it will keep us awake enough so that we can keep it up. I'm sorry, often I've found that rote repetition and maintaining interest don't go well together. The practice that I recommend, because it works for me and for others that I've worked with, is as fresh and spontaneous as this very moment now itself is. By definition, it can never be, like day-old bread, but it's always in this instant, instantaneous. And it's also best, in my opinion, to have something in the practice that you're doing that is self-interesting, that our self likes, or crudely put, something about you, and the selfish you at that. In other words, a practice that is in your face enough to actually continually make sensing, and keep us interested. We need that. Learning about ourselves always seems to be something we like to do and can keep us interested. And this particular practice offers that. In my opinion, the above two qualities are essential. A practice that is self-interesting and one that is vivid or fresh in the moment. Otherwise, we're just too easily bored, and many people find it very difficult to practice by rote with no feedback, meaning no results that we can measure. Or often it's even difficult to find the time each day where we can fit a standard sitting practice in. You know, or in my life, it was often the first thing that would be abandoned would be my practice if things got hectic. Now, I knew that I could do better tomorrow. Tomorrow I'd have a really good sitting. So I just won't do it today because it would just be pointless. Anyway, if we can find the time to schedule practice of the sitting kind, the amount spent on practice still usually way too little, to fully prime the pump. So, aside from whatever practice we do on the cushion part-time each day, we also need a full-time Dharma practice, something that we can do off the cushion right in the midst of our daily routine, and one that offers enough practice that it actually adds up to a real amount of practice that gets done. And let's not forget the old saying, God helps those who help themselves factor. If you're having trouble with your current practice to the point of just not doing it at all, or resisting doing it, then something is wrong and has to be adjusted. Just like when I have something like go to the dentist and it doesn't feel right, I have to go back until he adjusts that tooth, so that I just feel normal. If we want to, to sit and spin our wheels, time will just eventually pass us by, because there we will sit. An authentic Dharma teacher is also an expert mechanic. They can free us up, they can grease our wheels and keep us on the road. So it's easy to get lost in a pit stop or a timeout when we kind of stop doing a practice and take some time off, and hard to get back into it. What I've found is that a few words of adjustment from a qualified Dharma teacher, and I'm back on the road again. So there's no question that this approach I'm presenting here is all about having a teacher or guide. Declaring that we don't need a Dharma guide is like, in my opinion, announcing that we're going to do our own brain surgery. The Tibetan lineage in which I study and practice, the Karma Kagyu, is totally built on the teacher-student relationship. So don't leave home without it.